So it comes from this word scolae, which means leisure. The meaning of school is leisure. I sometimes fancy that there could be few words that could so tidily demonstrate that our culture is backward than that the word for school, which we associate with obligation and obligatory, mandatory, institutional education, in fact comes from this word that means leisure. It's a bit of an ironic etymology, but I think there's something possibly liberatory in that, so that's one of the things that I want to explore here in this first segment. The word emerges or starts to take on its scholastic context in a rudimentary way with the emergence of Western philosophy. So Western philosophy, usually that word is referring to a tradition that begins in the 6th century BCE in Asia Minor, so like in Turkey and in the Greek-speaking world. But it's a lot different than what we mean by philosophy in the modern sense. So when we say philosophy in the modern sense, maybe you imagine somebody who's engaged in a lot of speculative thought, publishing some papers on the subject, making sort of assessments of the nature of reality or the nature of society or the nature of ethics, things like that. They did do that. But the kind of inquiries that they did in early philosophy were inseparable from the kind of things that we would expect from somebody who studies the physical sciences. So the physical sciences and speculative thought were not yet divided, they were integrated. What was also integrated was its therapeutic application. It was always about how to make people feel right or to get right with themselves. There was a therapeutic aspect. So in a way, think of what we now think of in terms of philosophy, what we now think of in terms of the physical sciences, what we now think of in terms of psychology as well. And furthermore, what we now think of in terms of poetic performance, because only very slowly did philosophers stop using poetry to express what they wanted to express. Music was the primary way of expressing it because it was an oral culture. Philosophy means the love of wisdom, but originally this word Sophia is also helpful to redefine a little bit. It doesn't mean wisdom necessarily in like a old man stroking his gray beard type of sense, but in a practical sense. It's stuff that applies to your actual life. Skill in the matters of everyday life. So philosophy, I just really want to impress this fact, was a practice and a performance. Here are two philosophers right here. On the left, we have Xenophanes. Xenophanes is from the 6th to 5th centuries BCE. Very much a poet. We have a bunch of his poetic fragments that remain to us. And another thing that's cool is that he calls out other poets. Like if you think of the Greek poets that most people on the street could probably list, they would say maybe Homer, maybe some others could list Hesiod. These are at the very beginning of the Greek tradition, and Homer tells us the story of the Iliad, the Odyssey. Are you familiar with the Iliad and the Odyssey? One of the cool things about Xenophanes is not only is he a Pythagorean philosopher, so he's a follower of Pythagoras, but he calls out Homer and he calls out Hesiod, and he's like, they suck. Why would they portray the gods that way? Why would they tell stories that are so idiotic? He fights the other poets. There's a bit of a battle rapper aspect to him. This other picture is not even perfectly relevant to what we're talking about, but I thought it was a cool picture. It's Empedocles. He looks like a Pokemon card. Empedocles is from the 5th century, and he's credited with the creation of the 4 classical elements, so water and air and fire and earth, so the Captain Planet type of figure. And he sort of presented himself as a Captain Planet type of figure, not with blue skin and not magically appearing, but he did present himself as a god. He dressed in ornate robes, he wore golden sandals, and he claimed to be a god. There's even a story about him that he jumped into the fires of Mount Etna to prove that he was in fact divine. And then the fires spit up just one of his golden sandals. So people are like, oh, I guess he wasn't a god. That's probably an apocryphal story, but my point is this. Being a philosopher was an outlandish presentational gesture and its early origins. And so this is important to this etymology that I was discussing, school, because the meaning that it starts to take on from originally just meaning leisure in the broad sense, like whatever you do with your free time, it starts to mean listening to or conversing with a philosopher as a use of your free time. Go into the show and participating in the show in some way, maybe making some remarks yourself, having a conversation. And from that it congeals into this more concrete definition, which is one step closer to our modern notion of school, which is the philosophical discourse or lecture itself, the thing itself. You follow me? You follow me so far? Cool. And so this is where I've gotten this term, old school scholae, a public, informal jam session, as it were, involving group learning and group performance and group therapy. And here I put it on a phone. This is where I get this term instrument of leisure. So, again, Mark, I'm shaking in my boots because I was so powerfully stirred by your pessimistic view of things. And like I said, I'm coming out the gate sound a little positive. I want to rebrand the phone, or whatever is going to replace the phone, as the instrument of leisure. But I choose this very intentionally because you hear the word leisure, and it's not that it has a negative connotation, but it's got a dubious connotation. because it's inflected by probably our capitalistic mindset. The ideology of work is a good thing, and we have this very strict divergence typically between work and play. But that's precisely what I want to reverse. It's an instrument of leisure in the sense that I would say this is the site of our current group therapy, group jam sessions, and group information exchange on this relational level. And the kinds of ideological and informational exchanges that we're seeing on the phone or in whatever space is generated by the phone, by whatever technology, whatever physical technology, is that leisure space, that scroll space. And it's literally what we do. We scroll, we're chilling. And in that moment of chilling, we're engaged in a way that resembles, in certain crucial aspects, this early educational iteration. Another analogy that I like to make is that social media, as one of the features of that space, is kind of similar to the ancient agora. The agora was the center of town of an ancient Greek city-state where you'd have people selling things, as you very much do as you scroll through your feeds, but you also had people sharing ideas and sometimes commodifying those very ideas. So the site of commodities, ideas, and commodified ideas. So if you take a scroll, that's a nice turn of phrase actually, you take a scroll down your feed, cool, I remember that. If I take a scroll down my TikTok feed, you know what I mean? Which is, imagine walking the way you scroll, sort of flopping around. There's a lot of educators. Now granted, that's my algorithm. There's also a lot of other stuff. But there's a lot of people who are using it to transmit information. Some poorly, some well, some in a faithful and reliable way, some in a really unreliable way. But that's what you're seeing. And that's what I imagine when you walk through the agora. You'd see a Socrates over here having a heated conversation with some people and bringing them to come to realize their ignorance. You would have somebody else pontificating on the side of showing one of their showpieces as a philosopher expressing some idea that they have. And so it resembles it in that way. So these notions of education being conversational and performative and elective. I think I pretty well illustrated this point, but just to make it a little bit sharper. Here's Hank Green. Anybody know Hank Green? He does like a lot of YouTube videos, and he liked one of my videos the other day. He left a comment, and I was, I had butterflies, because Hank Green in a way is the ultimate sort of exemplification of what I'm angling to do in certain respects, and he illustrates this point perfectly. He's essentially a philosopher in this old sense. He just kind of knows about everything, or he's trusted to know about everything. And the way that he expresses himself is people will send him a question, and he'll answer it. The question, I think this question was something like, why don't water and gasoline mix? You know what I mean? Like, why don't you want to pour water on a grease fire, I think is the question. But also somebody could ask him about the nature of the winds, or like, why does the earth rotate the way it does? And he'll just know. He'll do the research, and he'll give you some ostensibly reliable information. There is actually a theory that the text of Aristotle, which anybody ever read Aristotle in the original? Or not necessarily in Greek, but just read Aristotle like front to back, you'll find that some of it is kind of nice to read and some of it's like, this is terrible to read, like this is really unpleasant. The reason is there's a theory that Aristotle, those texts are actually just the records of him responding to his students' specific questions. They were really his students' notes or his own lecture notes for a particular question. They were never meant to be understood outside of the context of that question. So imagine publishing the collected TikTok comment responses of Hank Green, and that's how we remember Hank Green. That'd be very disappointing for Hank Green, you know what I mean? But that's sort of, I think he also wrote some books, But that's the sort of analogy that I'm trying to establish. Some of these ideas, insofar as I'm a little bit teasing out the idea of idealizing this instrument of leisure as something that possibly creates a more vigorous mode of experiencing education and a redefinition of school as this old school scholé. These ideas are related to ideas in critiques of institution. Anybody familiar with Ivan Illich? I have no idea what communication students read, so this is like, a very exciting adventure for me. He's a philosopher who has this classic book called Deschooling Society, which is basically, we've gotten it wrong. We should end mandatory institutions altogether as far as mandatory institutions of learning. They're not doing us any favors. Because if you learn at them, you learn in spite of them. You learn because you had a relationship with a teacher there. It's just about relationship. So whatever facilitates relationship is where we should locate learning values and learning structures rather than in hierarchical institutions. And it's kind of a compelling idea. Furthermore, this is in 1971, and he's got this chapter on like what we should do instead of having school is just have these networks where like you can say what your interests are and you can link up somehow with other people who have similar interests. You can have conversations through these networks, and we've got computers. I bet we could use the computers somehow to do it. He's like unveiling this whole idea, like maybe it'll work. And it works too well, as you can see, because this is exactly what we have going on, insofar as the online space now becomes a site of education. On a similar note, there's somebody I met recently named Donnie Pointer, who has this thing called Grokist. It's an app. It's sort of like homeschooling for adults. It's meant to set up your course for you by virtue of linking you with somebody who knows about it or helping you establish a curriculum, and then you just go to town. On this same note, just illustrating my own journey, this is a comment somebody gave me the other day. I feel like this TikTok just made school obsolete, which was a very nice comment, you know, and he's got like a sweating emoji. I guess he's laughing. And I think, just to continue to illustrate what I'm talking about, I translated the comment to what I think is meant by this, that something of the original nature of school has been reintegrated by virtue of the chaotic, elective, and relational experience of digital learning. This is what I think is meant by this. We've talked a lot now about the conversational and relational elements of this form of schooling. Now I want to talk a little bit about the poetic elements or the performative elements. This is Hesiod, so he's roughly contemporary with Homer. Anybody ever read Hesiod before? There's two original poets from the Greek tradition. There's Homer, who has our Iliad and our Odyssey, and then there's Hesiod, and Homer's legacy has been a lot more fortuitous. Everybody reads Homer in school. Hesiod, they don't. Probably because his main work was a work about farming, and this is just not a main interest of most people, although maybe it should be. So Hesiod has this didactic poetry. Didactic poetry refers to poetry that teaches, and arguably all ancient poetries from really any tradition are didactic poetries, because they're always about teaching something, because teaching has not been divorced from other types of acts of performance. Again, this leisure, this integrated wisdom space that I'm talking about still remains intact and whole, rather being separated into these different categories. A very similar construction within the context of hip-hop comes from KRS-One, who has this term edutainment. Edutainment is, a portmanteau collapsing education and entertainment. So very much the same idea. And as it would so happen, again, on my particular feed, and I know that's particular to me, which is its own issue, which we can discuss, there are a lot of people educating, and a lot of people educating through music and parody songs, and a lot of them rap. Rap is very serviceable and suitable to making up songs that contain a lot of didactic information. You can just fit a lot of stuff in there. So, I made this slide. This was the funnest slide to make. The slide is called, "Our Teachers Live in Our Phones and They Rap." Really, I was just trying to justify what I wanted to talk about and what you study, and put some pictures of my friends. And here they are. So I'll go around. This is Paperboy Love Prince, friend who recently ran for mayor, who's also an educator and an MC. Fuge, who does wonderful music, especially aimed at families and children. Raven, the science maven, over there, she made science songs. Baba Brinkman, over here, who makes a lot of science and philosophy rap, and has aggregated a bunch of fellow rappers like myself into a group that sort of gets deployed to different events and stuff like that. This is Corey James Gray, another great MC, and right here is Hilla the Killer, who's in the room right here. A round of applause for Hilla, look at her. Hilla makes songs about the earth, as the earth, and teaches about them. Does anybody else here rap? I should have asked. Cool, okay. Here's yet another analogy, and another thing that I want to make you all say. Hupo menemata procera. You want to try that one? I'll do it one more time. Hupo menemata procera. Ready? I know, that was like performatively bad. It was okay. These are things that are things to remember, things to be remembered, or little objects of memory. Mnemonic devices, if you will. That mnem is the same root as mnemonic. That are ready at hand, prokeron. This is a term that gets also attached to the philosophical tradition as it starts to congeal. As the first major philosophical schools emerged, like Stoicism and Epicureanism, they all had their own little lists of set phrases, their sort of greatest hits, as you were, the things that you want to remember. And the reason you want to remember them and have them at hand is so that you can stay balanced and poised in whatever philosophy you're pursuing. Like you're starting to worry about something, oh, I got to go back to my memorable Stoic phrases, or my memorable Epicurean phrases. And this word, these things to remember, hupomenemata, starts to come to mean essentially personal notebooks. And they become literally these little stacks that people would accumulate of all the little things that they wanted to remember and all the little things that help them to stay sort of in their lane and really resemble the kind of use that we make of our leisure instruments when we use them for things like affirmations or things like quotes that we write down or our little collections of videos that we've seen. And so a hupomenema, that's the singular of that same word, is essentially a lot like a meme, like a helpful spiritual meme. Do you collect, spiritual memes? Do you ever see quotes and stuff on your feed and you're like, I gotta remember that shit, it's a nice one. And you like put it in your little, And whatever I do is I do that because I'm self-conscious about it. I'm like, this is really silly. Like, I'm remembering this thing that's about keeping me in the moment, and like, let me save that there on my phone. I put that there in my notes on this very, very dubious device. Nonetheless, that's how they were using these notebooks. And they had the same kinds of paranoia, because you had some philosophers, while this was going on, that mistrusted the whole technology in the first place. And by the technology, I mean writing stuff. From Plato onward, there's this tinge in philosophy of like, writing stuff down seems kind of whack, seems mistrustful. The same kind of things that we're saying about this device, and for similar reasons. A particularly popular genre of upomnemata is Stoicism. The reason is Stoicism is very ethically rigorous. It really asks a lot of you. Stoicism, anybody familiar with Stoicism? Any card-carrying Stoics? Right, you got the card. This is how Stoics dress. Lots of neon colors. Stoicism is interesting, and they had a lot of these little mnemonics that they wanted to keep in mind for ways to keep your mind poised, because it's a very ethically rigorous system. Stoicism holds that pleasure and pain are matters of total indifference. It doesn't matter if you're happy or sad, if you feel good or feel bad. The reason is that the universe is a single, organic, living entity. The whole universe is one throbbing, alive thing. And you're part of it the way your cells are a part of your body. And in the same way that you would expect your cells not to get too mad if they die, or if they, have to get killed, or if you don't mourn the loss of a dead skin cell, nor should you mourn the loss of your own life. Nor should those cells go into some sort of renegade mode, because that we call a cancer. So just get with the program and don't feel one way or another about it. That's a lot to ask of people. And so Stoics, like Marcus Aurelius, for instance, he has a very famous collection of upomnemata, which is now called the Meditations. Have you ever heard of the Meditations of Marcus Aurelius? They're really just called the Notes to Himself. This is one such notebook. And so you can imagine him just sort of, tweeting these things or accumulating these things. They became public, but they were really mostly for himself. And so it is a similar sort of structure of remarks that are pointed to oneself, but then made public at the same time for the use of everyone else. So, in the spirit of that, I want to talk about Stoicism a little bit more. You ever looking at your phone, scrolling around, and starting to ask yourself if there's any higher meaning or purpose in life, like whether you're supposed to be getting with some sort of cosmic program? You ask yourself that, and maybe sometimes you feel really connected. Maybe sometimes you don't feel connected. When I feel connected, what I try to do is stay stoic. You know what I'm saying? Well, you can help me with this. We can all do this one together. So, the chorus of the song goes, be a stoic. That's the only 3 words that you gotta remember. It goes like this. Be a stoic. Can you wait for it? Be a stoic. Be a stoic. Be a stoic. Okay, let's do it one more time. Ready? Be a stoic. It's fun, right? Be a stoic. So you're remembering it, right? Be a stoic. Be a stoic. Life can have some baggage. It's all in how you stow it. Everything you have may get snatched away and stolen. The matter that you're made of will get scattered like a stone when it gets broken into sand. Understand, be a stoic. The Stoics were a sect among the Romans and Greeks who said, yo, seek peace, you emotional peeps. Everything's a whole and you're only a piece. So don't feel in a hole or get overly pleased. For the Stoics conceived that the world had a soul, universal, co-eternal with its motion and whole. So you should make it your goal to come to know what your role is and roll with its will and be chill. Be a Stoic. It's for fish to swim. It's for clouds to rain. It's for mountains to get ground down to grains. And it's ours with brains when we're crowned to pain. To not wild out but be down with change. Be a Stoic. 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 Even if you lose your purse. Be a Stoic. If you lose your whole person at worst. Be a Stoic. Don't be overjoyed or richer. Your employer is the universe. You're always at work. So if you're ever hurt by the products of chance, just remember it's the universe's provident plans. It's your part in the dance that the planets ensole with. Don't be like, damn, just be a Stoic. Now I know what you're thinking. Well, I might not know what you're thinking. But maybe you're thinking, hey, Nate, there's a problem with this. First of all, I don't buy it. I don't buy that the universe is a giant, throbbing, living thing of which I'm a part as a cell to a body. That seems preposterous to me. That might be one thing you're thinking. You might also be thinking, wait a minute. Even if that's true, what if my emotions are actually very important? You know what I mean? What if my emotions are something I should not suppress? That seems kind of suspicious. What if my emotions, as a matter of fact, are my strength? Or you suppressant Stoics? Isn't evolution powered by our pain and our bliss? Isn't anguish and injustice and the angry raised fist the only way we get our way when haters make us insist? Well, now I'm getting pissed. I'm not supposed to be pissed. And these Stoics sound suspiciously like old white men. This higher mind we're supposed to follow kind of sounds like them. Take your place on the line, a hierarchical pattern. Know your part. When in Rome, are you the slave or the master? Yeah, word. It's a cogent critique. The slave role has rarely had a moment to speak. But if you take it more deep, maybe the roles you must seek are the very goals and dreams that make you wholly unique. You define your purpose in the work of the universe. You're the person, you determine what its pertinent work is first. Sure, it's a job and a vocation as well. But we're all part of God because we work for ourselves. And as far as I can tell, this is what the Stoics teach us. From Zeno to Epictetus, Seneca to Aurelius. Even though we be mere dust, there's meaning in being thus. Live for each other in peace and receive what comes. Be a Stoic. Even if you've lost your stuff, be a Stoic. Even when it's not enough, be a Stoic when it's not enough. and the job is tough. Be a stoic, do your job, and your job is love. So if you ever wonder what to do with your life, or whether there is even such a thing as doing what's right, no, you'll find it in sight when the part that you go in is a part of your whole. Play your role, be a stoic, even when you screw up the song. Be a stoic even when you're worried your presentation's too long. Be a stoic even when it's hard to smile. Be a stoic, you're paranoid that you messed up the first freestyle. Be a stoic, be right present in this moment. Be a stoic and share with these people your poems. Be a stoic and stay with the right situation. Be a stoic even when you're studying international communications. This is such a grand experiment, because, like I said, I've for so many years I've been like teaching and then rapping. You put them together. I'm learning a lot. You know what I mean? How are you feeling? You feeling good?
Yeah.
Nice. Okay, cool. Because there's not so many of us here that we can't talk about it. How about the people on the Zoom? You feeling all right? Oh, I have the chat. You're right. Okay, let's see what's going on in the chat. Mute, please. Mute. Well, that doesn't seem very auspicious. Please. Where's the button to mute the host? What teacher does a presentation with a picture of themselves like this? Is ridiculous. Silly. Okay, let's proceed. So, here's part two. Sophist or philosopher, influencer or blank. Yeah, intriguing. So, there's a problem. And Mark, this is where we get to the pessimistic session.
I'm not a pessimist, by the way.
Oh, I know. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to pick on you. I can tell. No, it sounds like you're an idealist, really. Because you're trying to envision getting beyond, these oppressive structures, which is, I agree. There's a problem that was cited in the ancient world pertinent to this stuff. Like I said, Plato was worried about writing itself as a gesture. And another thing that Plato was worried about in particular was telling the philosophers from another breed that are called the sophists. Now, sophist doesn't necessarily mean something negative. It's not inherently bad. It just tended to mean somebody who uses their ability to perform wisdom for profit. So if you're getting paid already, Plato says, there's something kind of ambiguous about this. And Socrates, Plato's teacher, famously did not take any pay. He just had conversations for their own sake, because otherwise you're compromising this wisdom cultivation process. And I would say that, again, to continue these analogies, sophists are kind of like influencers. Again, not an inherently bad thing. There's such a thing as a good influencer, but it's not the kind of thing that most people would introduce themselves and say, "Hi, I'm an influencer." You'd be like, "Yeah, it's like a very tacky title to give yourself," just because we seem vaguely suspicious of it, or at least I feel vaguely suspicious of it. The sophist was a similar role. And so if we made an SAT-style analogy, sophist is to philosopher, as influencer is to what? I mean, what do we put there? That's the question. I was trying, maybe you could help me think of something. Online creative educator, digital philosopher, wisdom poster, as opposed to wisdom poser. What do you got? Anything? What should it be? It's a serious question. It's not a serious question, but it's not a rhetorical question. Filmmaker? Just in general? Like Quentin Tarantino is... Okay, yeah. I mean, the idea is somebody who teaches and sincerely cultivates wisdom for its own sake, using the apparatus of this space, of the digital space.
Thought leader.
Thought leader, okay, that's interesting. Thought leader, I think, in many ways, to me, connotatively, falls already into the same category of influencer where people raise an eyebrow, or I've heard people, denigrate the term. But I think you're very much on the right track. That's sort of what I'm thinking of. Speaking of such folks, here's another discussion we can have. So this is Ryan Holiday on the left. On the right is Jeff Bezos. Ryan Holiday probably wouldn't be thrilled about me putting him together. It might be because I'm jealous of him. So Ryan Holiday is this guy who's made a very successful career out of writing a few books about Stoicism and popularizing it on social media. He has this book and this sort of feed and a website called The Daily Stoic, where you get daily Stoic quotes, which I love. Basically, and he's just hugely successful. We're the exact same age, but he's like a multi-millionaire. He's rocking it. I'm not saying that I want to be Ryan Holiday. I'm just saying sometimes in the dark nights of my soul, I think of Ryan Holiday and I'm like, I am not Ryan Holiday. But he's managed to popularize Stoicism to a great degree. Pop Stoicism, in a sense. And I call it pop Stoicism because a distinct thing about it is that it leaves out some of the more challenging metaphysical principles underlying Stoicism. It leaves out that whole living world thing, and it's basically just don't let your emotions run away with you. It just gives you that reminder, but without answering the why the deep why of why it shouldn't matter what your emotions are. And it's been very popular with entrepreneurs, and you can begin to imagine how that's kind of problematic. You're not getting a sincere transmission of the whole thing necessarily. If Stoicism, and going back to ancient Stoicism, reading a quote or two, makes you feel justified in firing 200 people on your lunch break or something like that, I guess it'd be after or before your lunch break, maybe that's not exactly what we mean by the cultivation of wisdom. So I'm not saying that Ryan Holiday is a bad actor. I'm just saying he's been instrumental in making this popularization, and Bezos happens to be a huge fan of modern Stoicism. Holiday is actually self-conscious about it. He's got a book called Confessions of a Media Manipulator, where he realizes the role that he's playing in this process. So objections emerge. Here's a quote from a scholar at, I think, University of California, Pamela Hieronymi. Education is not the transmission of information or ideas. I've been using that word transmission, so she would push back about that. Education is the training needed to make use of information and ideas. As information breaks loose from libraries and floods onto mobile devices, that training becomes more important, not less. And so I've been sort of teasing out implicitly this idea that, institutions, we're done with the institutions. I don't need them anymore. I reach more people on my phone, which I do. I'm reaching tons of people, and we're having sincere conversations. People are reaching out to me. I'm having more sincere conversations about philosophical topics with people I'm meeting in my comment section and messages than I did with students. Part of that is a function of the fact that I was mostly teaching Latin, but part of it is the fact that mostly my students wanted to talk about their grades. That's all that they cared about, really. They cared about that quantization. So I've been teasing out this idea that maybe somehow this is better. But this is pushback against that idea that there's no way of vetting the information. And so that's a very high price to pay. This kind of critique belongs to a larger body of critiques called technological solutionism. Anybody, do you read Jacques Ellul at all? Definitely don't know this, because I don't know what a communication student reads, but we'll talk about that later. Jacques Ellul has this book called The Technological Society, where he essentially says that we've gotten caught in a mentality of technological solutionism, where we're always using technology to solve the problems that technology causes. And technology creates new problems that then make it necessary for even further technologies. It's like, the perfect example would be an app that helps you not use your phone so much. An app on your phone to help you not use your phone. It embeds this idea of like putting a Band-Aid on a Band-Aid on a Band-Aid on a Band-Aid in an infinite regress. So Ellul explores this idea, and then it's continued in more contemporary. Ellul's writing in the mid-20th century, but Morozov is writing now about some of these ideas, specifically in the realm of internet stuff. And so I've been offering this idea, age of leisure, but it's a very subtle line between that and an age of sedation. You're getting tired, you know what I mean? Other cool thing about having masks in this, for a lecture is you can yawn, you know what I mean? Because I remember when I was going to more lectures back when I was more in academia, like, you get tired. Are you sleep? I'm just saying it's okay. You still feeling good? You feeling all right? Yes. Okay, cool. So all of this leads us to some of the familiar icky feelings that come with this experience, and I experience them all the time. I wouldn't want you to feel that somehow, by virtue of succeeding to some degree with jettisoning myself from the academic space and institutional space and educating on here, that I'm free of that stuff, because I'm not. I'm ridden with anxieties all the time. I mean, I was before about other stuff, but constantly quantifying my own success and how much I'm reaching people, constantly worrying about what I'm going to post. It's like a whole phantom self on my existing self. And it makes me sad. So, I made a song about it. This song is actually a flip of a different song. A flip phone. It's about scrolling my phone, but have you ever, Lil TJ? Not the right crowd. Actually, he barely knows music either. And also Black. So Lil TJ and Black, these are two artists. They have a song called Callin' My Phone. This, however, is called Scrolling My Phone. And actually, never performed this live, so it's not memorized. So this is the debut. You ready for a debut? Yeah. Okay, let's do it. All right. Steady scrolling my phone, fitting out my soul to my dome with some so-so posts all alone while I post up at home. Flipping with my thumb while I'm stoned. I kinda miss my Samsung flip with its tone. Trying to get the angle as a layaway on a rectangle underpaid labor maid. I toss away my day like a paper plate. I kinda rather use it as a paperweight. Okay, I use it for my art, but shit is subtle how it gets into your heart and turns your head into a puddle. Pretty soon I bet we'll all get carpal tunnel. I kinda wanna bury it and throw away the shovel. I know you may be thinking it to make your own bread, but it may be over needed like a weak loaf of bread. I'm weak, I loaf in bed, I'm deep over my head, and tweets and posts between all these feeds, I'm overfed. Scroll? I'd rather look at a scroll. I'd rather re-examine my societal role. I'd rather memorize where I'ma drive when I roll. I'd rather not desensitize my mind and my soul. Tired of ads, misleading news bots, emojis replacing emotional nuance, waking and reaching before I think two thoughts for the text message, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube box. It's not morally wrong, it's just nice to have balance like a chorus in a song. This isn't my song, it's some words that I wrote. Ironically enough, on Apple knows my phone, filling up my soul and my dome with some so-so posts all alone while I post up at home. As soon as I post this, I'm off it. Oh wait, let me just see who likes it and comments. I'm not trying to hate though, the phone can be helpful. I'm not trying to be that judgmental millennial. I'm just saying that sometimes I'm missing myself was just a cell. You as well, then let's do something else. Yeah. Yep, that was me on my phone. What do you look like when you're on your phone? Do you ever film yourself doing it? You know, just so, let's continue. This moves us into another related topic. This part is called Information as the Ultimate Reality. Ponderous title, also a nice salmon background. You would be amazed the amount of time I spent fussing around with these colors. Because that's the other thing, is I haven't made a presentation in a long time, you know. And when I taught, I was usually sort of a whiteboard guy, you know. But I was like, let me pull out all the stops. The color choosing is huge. I mean, because a lot of you are academics, you know, presently, do you find yourself spending a lot of time choosing the colors for the backgrounds? Like, it's kind of absurd how big of a role. You might as well just retire now and make shit for your phone, like I do. Make videos. It's the same amount of time, you know, picking colors. Anyway, to continue. So, we talked about this question of how do you tell the philosopher from the sophist. A related question and a deeper question is how to tell reality from simulation. This is a hard pivot, I admit. I'll also just come right here and say I'm trying to segue to a different song, so this is why we're doing this hard pivot. But it is related. It is related. It's a related question. It's related because it's the same kind of question that Plato was asking. Plato was like, wait, how do we tell the philosopher from the sophist? Well, the philosopher is talking about reality, and the sophist is talking about things that are maybe false. But then he was like, wait a minute, how do I tell what's real and what's not real? And so that's how they're the same question, essentially. So this is why Plato's really obsessed with this. You've probably heard of Plato's cave, where the true philosopher is the one who's able to see what's really going on. Everyone else is seeing just shadows on a cave wall. And this idea is kind of a perennial one. It has many different manifestations. Baudrillard, Jean Baudrillard, the sociologist and philosopher and sort of postmodern scholar, states or suggests that we're always already in a simulation because the ideologies that inundate us, the information that we're constantly encountering and bombarded with, keeps us from ever accessing the real. And there's several orders of simulation, and we're as far from reality as you can actually get, and it's just kind of simulations all the way down. That's the sociological way of looking at this, an epistemological way of looking at it. But we can also think of it in an even deeper way, in a metaphysical and ontological sense, and ask questions like, what is reality? What is matter in the first place? What is information? And now we get into simulation theory in the more sort of concrete sense. There's a species of modern analytic philosophy called neutral monism. Anybody familiar with neutral monism? Monism is the notion that there's just one substance, and neutral monism is essentially the idea that all phenomena that exist are of the same ilk. There's no, when I say ontological, I mean differences of being. There's no different kind of being involved in physical matter and appearances, a neutral monist would say. Thoughts, physical stuff, all one thing. It solves a lot of philosophical problems, because a lot of philosophers are scratching their heads like, what is the difference between matter and mind? And if you're a neutral monist, you just say, it's all just one thing. It just has different qualities going on with it and behaves in different ways. And one subspecies of neutral monism has this thesis, that information is the ultimate reality. This is a really hot issue right now in philosophy, insofar as there can be hot issues in philosophy as it's now practiced. It's hot because it's interesting and because it's very relevant. We are inundated with information constantly, with those inputs and those outputs. And so when we start to reflect on what is actually going on here, it's a relevant question and a relevant way of thinking. It also, like I said, has its ancient precedents. The Platonists, so Plato and his followers, were really ultimately drawing on Pythagoras, like the guy with the theorem, who was also a philosopher, and a vegetarian. The reason he thought he was a vegetarian is because he felt that souls get reincarnated. So you don't want to eat an animal, you might be eating one of your friends. You know what else you should not eat? Is beans, because he felt that beans had souls. Really invalidates what I'm about to say, but he had this idea that then ended up influencing Plato, that all phenomena, this very idea, reduced to little bits of information. Plato calls these the forms. This is where we get the term Platonic forms. That's one premise. Another premise they both had is that the universe is experiential. Mind or soul is distributed throughout all different little bits of matter. And so we have this idea of the universe as information experiencing itself. And this is related to these modern questions. Am I in a simulation? Am I on someone's phone right now? I'm on the Zoom right now. How you guys doing? You guys still doing good? You good? Yeah. Right. Franklin, you well? I'm giving you a high five. I love Franklin. You're very popular here, Franklin. But like, am I literally being looked at by someone right now? This is a legitimate question to consider. And in its concrete sense, the question comes from a guy named Nick Bostrom, an Oxford philosopher, originally Swedish, who asked this question, am I in a simulation? And so, segue complete. Let's talk about that now. You ever scroll on your phone, and this is how my song starts. You ever scroll on your phone? You ever scroll on your phone and you look at it and you're like, oh, I gotta be present right now. So you put it down. You're like, I'm present. Okay, so now I'm present. But then what's the difference? Am I present here more by virtue of not looking at a screen? Or is this just another screen, my experience of reality? Or maybe I'm the one who's on the screen. You ever ask yourself that this is actually it? As you grab another snack, pack another hit, this accidental mashup of your atoms and shit that manifest and vanish at the flash of a click, don't you feel that it's a bit, have a seat, have a savor, as if it isn't real? This whole situation is less like life and more like information. Do you feel that you're in a simulation? Existence, it's nar. But what if what you are is just a bar of written code, a code at a bar? A well-regarded author out at Oxford has argued that all this is software, but don't take it hard. Because given what our artifice can already do, and its exponential progress, it is probable superhuman humans went and freaking simulated you, dude. For one of the following is logically true. Either A, a civilization with enough sophistication that could make our simulation never makes it because it caves in. Or B, those civilizations that could make us may be. They don't make sims because they find it inhumane to deceive. But seeing as we tend to flex and say F it, let's just make the next invention, then we'll question the ethics. It may be that C is the credible premise. We're simulations that someone else edits. Am I in a simulation? And if this is a simulation, would it change the situation? Isn't every day a data make we made of information? You getting what I'm saying? Shit, bro, is it so? All of my rhythm and all of my soul, all the phenomena ripping and flow, nothing but copies and written in code? At least they let us live, although they misled us. We're all just Tamagotchis on a demigod's necklace. We got internet and Netflix. We're objects on a screen watching screens, and we contemplate what all of it means. And it seems that what we are when watching vids on our cell are forms of entertainment entertaining themselves. Oh well. What if we're not meant to know? And acknowledging the play may just stop the whole show. Oh. And if nothing is real, the apple of knowledge may not have appeal. Rene Descartes, Keanu Reeves, the dude at the grave on the DMT, Plato's cave, made no scenes, and made me fake, and we made me seem to wait. If that's what I am, and I'm simulated by others, well what if my thinkers are running by others, and so on by others that simulate them? Well then, my little simulated friend, that's an infinite regress, unless there's something at the end, at the center and beginning, and ever blessed it's ever been. A presence at the essence. Amen. But if all that is isn't, or is but is all just autonomous figments of fixed algorithms and infinite ribbons of code, well then so, what's the difference? For if it's illusion, pixel and frame, it may still be goodwill that will win us the game. And if knowing it's not real is what glitches and ends it, we'll end it all literally interconnected. So if this is a simulation, then we can still live in relation. Caches in a data set or atoms in arrangement. Even if it's made up, it may still be what you make it. Thanks. When I first showed Hilla that song, she was like, so what? What difference does it make? That's why I added, the last part I added in response to her, she was like, interesting, bro. Maybe. I don't know. All right. Part 4. There's only 10. Relax. You don't know if I'm joking. There's only 4. See, it's full circle. It's ring composition. 4 is the right amount of parts. Leisure, we're back to leisure, but also pleasure and the ecology of information. I want to try and draw together some of these threads. So if we think about some of these themes that are coming up, one way that I sort of conceptualize them, if we are just a bunch of little bits of information, we're made of bits of information, everything is on the same neutral monistic plane, then it becomes a sort of ecological question of what am I putting in and what am I putting out? And another way to ask ourselves these important questions, especially as we move from the phone to whatever lies beyond it, to the metaverse, in the lowercase m sense, not in the Zuckerberg sense, but just because the term precedes him, in the broad sense of the metaverse, this mixture of reality, quote unquote, augmented reality, virtual reality, as we move into all that, we have to ask ourselves, am I integrating with it or not? And one way that I think of that is, am I fleeing from the level that I'm on, or am I connecting with the level that I'm on? Is the tool, is the instrument of leisure helping me make that connection? Because it'd be far too brash to say that it never does. It'd be too much to say that my phone never connects me to the moment, in the full, deep, even spiritual sense of connection, if you like. Am I fleeing or am I connecting? And I think it's relevant as we look at the metaverse, sort of a play on words from the Greek root, meta, where, that new company, or that, that company that's losing all that money got its new name, can mean different things. It can mean beyond in a sort of qualitatively transcendent sense, or in the sense of escape, getting out of here, getting beyond this moment, or it can mean with in the sense of integration or accompaniment. So what kind of meta are we talking about when we talk about the metaverse? Am I integrating my awareness of the various levels of reality or not? Is this leisure in that sort of positive sense that I've tried to imbue it with, or is it escape? And this brings us to yet another school of ancient philosophy that in many ways thought in these terms, Epicureanism. So we're going to end on sort of a pleasurable note, because the Epicureans were about pleasure. Are you familiar with Epicureanism? Epicureanism is essentially the idea that, they start off from a much different view of reality than the Stoics did, for instance, because rather than the universe being alive and having some purpose for you in mind, the universe is just a bunch of matter. They were radical materialists. They thought that there was two things, atoms and the void. Atoms just infinitely careening through the void that happen to have different shapes, and they collided and they made you. You're just the chance collision of a bunch of atoms. Since that's the case, there's no gods to worry about. They just, maybe they exist, Epicurus said, but he probably meant they just don't exist. And there's no higher purpose to worry about, so just try and feel good. Just pursue pleasure. It's about pleasure. However, it's not about pleasure in the modern sense of the word Epicurean. It's very ironic that we think this way, and that we use the word now to refer to somebody who loves food and luxury, because it was the opposite of that. The Epicureans are actually very fastidious, because if you mess up your system, you're not going to feel pleasure at all, and so you should live a very balanced and a very simple life. Oops, I was supposed to slip. Look at this. That's what pleasure looks like. No, it's not really, because pleasure is actually much calmer than that. It's about balance. The word that they had for it is ataraxia, not being shaken up. So if something's shaking up your pleasure, stop it. If it's shaking up your pleasure to keep it away from yourself, then stop keeping it away from yourself. Lucretius is a Roman philosopher who's an Epicurean. Anybody read Lucretius before? Very enjoyable. If you're in the mood to not be in the mood for sex, read Lucretius. He has a whole book devoted to sex, describing it as like this weird impulse that we have because we're made of atoms, and the atoms want to keep on colliding. So you're mashing yourself in with all this other flesh, like blah, blah, blah. And it's the kind of gross things like, nevertheless, sometimes you want to do it, sometimes I want to do it, so do it sometimes, but just don't do it all the time. Fuck people sometimes, but don't fuck people all the time, and don't fuck all the people, because then you're going to feel bad. This is the thesis. Ataraxia. And I think of this in ecological terms, in the broad sense of ecology, and I'll expand that in a second. An ecology of information. If we consider ourselves materially as being also informational, as matter-informational beings, we must responsibly manage our inputs and our outputs. It's a very fancy way of saying sometimes use your phone, sometimes don't, and be conscientious of it. But it's important and it's profound, and it reaches back, insofar as it reaches back to some of these early ideas. I say ecology because this is another important root to me from the Greek oikos, meaning house. This is where we get ecos. Same place we get economy. But they both essentially mean the same thing, and in their earlier uses essentially meant the same thing. The management of the house. The management of the house of the universe, of which you are a constituent part. One substance with a bunch of little differentiated nodes, and you're made of more differentiated nodes. Now try and keep it in balance. That is the fundamental basis for Epicurean ethics. So questions like these: how do we manage the information that we ourselves are? One way of thinking about your choices and decision making. How is that information stored physically and psychologically? The conventional ecological question of where are we getting the power for all of this data that we have is a relevant question. But then it's in the same conversation with how much information do we want in our brains, in that information chunk. How do we regulate our information inputs and outputs? And I would argue that this is a question for philosophia and scholae. If we treat these devices as a space in which those kinds of questions can operate, then we're using them rightly, insofar as right is the kind of word to use in that, ethically speaking. A final hupomnema, a final meme, a final thing to remember, a maxim, because again, it's about maxims, not the magazine, but in the sense of things that you remember. The Epicureans had a lot of these. The Stoics had a lot of these. I made one up recently to make myself feel better, because I was feeling very obsessional for a while, and a lot of it had to do with social media, it had to do with identity issues. I'm still coming out of it, but I came with a mantra that's been serving me for this year, so this is my hupomnema in my little mental notebook, and literally in this thing. It was like this: stop fucking around with the bullshit. This is right? There's a lot of bullshit, so stop fucking around with it. You know what I mean? You can talk about it if you want to, but if that's not helpful, then stop. Stop fucking around with the bullshit. And that is the way that I think of my personal Epicureanism. This is the last song. Thanks so much for hanging out. Let's talk more after. Hey, what's good? No, for real. What's goodness? How do I determine what the meaning of good is? Good that, good this, good family, good kids. How do I define it and what kind of life's good to live? It's a good question. It's been asked before by philosophers of ethics and by authors of lore and by existential rappers when they're anxious or bored. Am I doing what's good? Should I be doing more? Well, some ask the Lord, but others may feel a theologic form of goodness kind of doesn't congeal with the scientific vibe of what's observably real. For to what is unknown, there's no need to kneel. And what's known is that we're atoms that are smashed into patterns and we're the random interactions of the accident matter is. And the chance that it's happened that I act and exist doesn't lead to any facts about what happiness is. But if matter just is what it is with no purpose, then what good is justice or virtuous service? This view is current, but it has its precursors. For instance, the 3rd century Greek Epicurus. Epicurus held that everything is atoms and void. You and everyone you know are merely atoms conjoined. There's no immortal soul, all you have is a choice. Are you going to be sad or would you rather enjoy it? What's good? Whatever. The highest good is pleasure. You want to get high, live a high life? Whatever. You want to live outside and live in purpose? Whatever. Everything's impertinent if it permits pleasure. But pleasure's defined by the absence of pain. It's a balance of gain. So don't go out of your lane without addicted and erratic shit that rattles your brain. The richest of pleasures are simple and plain. And when I look at this now, I think how simple it would be if I let my ego settle down and if I quit social media and then be sleeping more sound and then be seizing the day. I bet if he could see me now that Epicurus would say, he would say, stop fucking around with the bullshit. Stop obsessing over followers and views. Stop all this fixating, all this every moment waiting on a future vision of a famous you. You're an aggregate of atoms and it isn't that grand if those atoms have an active or inactive Instagram. You don't have to give a damn. You can feel your inner freedom. Peace be at ease, be an Epicurean. Y'all feel me? You feel what I'm saying? But wait, there's a problem. If anybody thinks about it, we kind of live already in a society where everybody's already pursuing their individual pleasures. And that doesn't sound very good. Sometimes that really sucks when people are just actuating their own individual desires. But here's the thing. The ancient Epicureans were not about that. They're actually very much about community. You yourself are a community of atoms. And so we need to think also about the communities that we create as our own nodes of being. It's a very important thing. And so instead of thinking of it in moral terms, like what's right to do this, it's wrong to do this, think of it in ecological terms. It's not about right and wrong, but about what works to foster that community. It's not that it's wrong to slip off into space just because you're the richest dude in the whole human race. It's just kind of a waste. And if that waste costs the pain of your fellow human beings, Epicurus would be saying, stop fucking around with this bullshit. Stop obsessing over hauling all the loot. Stop this inhumane and idiotic getting rich as if there's nothing else to do. Get enough to not die, and if enough's not there, just remember that you're atoms that are pumping in the air. Why become a billionaire? Be a humble human being, live in balance, have no care, be an Epicurean. I'm not here to judge. One judges the pain of being judged by everybody when you fudge it the same. And I'm not here to say there's no soul in here, for that indeed may be the thing that makes the atoms cohere. And while I don't know clear how God might fit in, Epicurus said that gods exist but not as our friends, I guess God is good, in the sense that the end of every pleasure lets another kind divinely begin. Stop fucking around with this bullshit. Stop receiving what you have is not enough. Stop basing your actions on your fears and your abstractions. Give no fucks, but then instead of them, give love. It's really not a question of what does it all mean, as do you feel the presence and the pleasure of your being as you let go of your shit and focus on your breathing. It's time for you to live, be an Epicurean. Stop fucking around with this bullshit. Your phone is just a phone and what it's worth is measured by the method of how you get connected to yourself and to the others and the earth. There's no one system or hard and fast rule, but redefine the phone and redefine school. Use that or any tool to try to find a meaning, be it Platonist or Stoic or Epicurean. Thank you, everybody. Thanks. Give yourself a round of applause. Appreciate you so much.
Unfortunately, all good things have to come to an end. So I don't know where to start. I'm so overwhelmed by what we have seen this evening and the ideas that have been percolated. And in a way, he and I intellectually, it looks like travel the same road. Reading the classics, Hesiod and Abadelic and Whitehead, studied, and Jacques Ellul is my favorite guru.
Wow, we got a lot to talk about. You can go.
Very much influenced by Jacques Ellul. Very much influenced.
I haven't got to talk to anybody about him.
So, well, it's my distinct pleasure to say thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
But still, that's only what we have, you know. So I'm looking for another philosopher in TikTok to come up with a better word. So we say apharistoming. So I hope you all, I'm sure you all enjoyed it. I don't want to say I hope. You definitely enjoyed this evening. I could see your body language and how much you were involved. And I think above all, it gave a lot to think about. To rethink about our assumptions, to rethink the way we look at the world around us, and to look the way we look at our little devices and our relationship with the devices. And that is how I myself was kind of thinking along the way as he was speaking. But what I liked, again, myself being the fellow who likes the classics and studied the classics, the connection with the classics to today's reality. And that is something that I've not been able to do. But you taught me that big breach from the connection that you made, and I'm grateful for that personally, because you know, we have to start thinking, and that is the unique capacity to read today's times with the eyes of the past, you know. So, and I take that home with me for today's evening. So very grateful. I hope we will have more encounters of this kind of engagement. And in fact, my good colleague there, Kevin, he's saying, you know, we have to do this better. This is worth doing better. So we'll be knocking on your door.
Thank you so much.
So, thank you so much. Everyone who wasn't here, those who joined us on the phones and whatever devices, but we're grateful for your presence. And thank you so much. And St. John's University is a good place to continue your graduate studies in terms of my friend there, integrated advertising communication. You can go and talk to him about that. You can do your master's degree in international communication that he referred to it many times. And of course, join Dara as colleagues in your PhD program in multi-sector communication. And so, by the way, I'm teaching philosophy of communication this semester. So we're drilling a lot of these kind of things. So we're talking about, but I've not been able to make a connection for the modern times that you do. That is my deficiency. So I'm still teaching them what they were doing at that time. You know? So that taught. But I have to now, I've learned something this evening to think in a way that make those connections. So thank you so very much. And thank you, my colleague Elizabeth there who joined us. And so once again, have a wonderful evening and hope to see you again. And probably we'll do some more encounters. Thank you.
Thanks everyone. I'm not gonna rush out, so if you want to talk or have questions or anything, we can chat.